Professor Krinks stood before his masterpiece, all four arms gesturing dramatically at the gleaming walls of the Galactic Academy's most prestigious testing facility. The chamber hummed with the soft blue glow of quantum processors, each one calibrated to challenge minds that had mastered interstellar travel before humans figured out fire. "Behold," Krinks announced to absolutely no one in particular, because that's what you do when you're a pompous academic with a superiority complex the size of a small moon, the cognitive evaluation matrix. 27 years in development. Tested on the finest intellects from 43 different species. Not one has achieved a perfect score. The door hissed open, and Ambassador Cleet shuffled in, looking like someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. Behind him trailed a small human child who was currently examining her own finger with the intense focus usually reserved for doctoral dissertations. "Professor Krinks," Cleet began, his voice carrying that special tone of barely contained panic that diplomats master when they know they're about to cause an interstellar incident. "May I present Earth's representative for today's evaluation?" Krinks turned all six of his eyes toward the human specimen, small, primitive clothing, currently picking her nose. "This is your champion." He didn't bother hiding his amusement. "Ambassador, I specifically requested your species' most advanced intellectual." "Well, you see," Cleet stammered, wringing his hands in a way that suggested he'd been doing a lot of that lately. There was a bit of a miscommunication with Earth's educational department, and they seemed to have sent, "Hi." The small human looked up from her finger inspection. "I'm Zoe. Are you the purple guy with all the arms? That's so cool. Do you use all of them to eat, or do some of them do other stuff? Like, do you have special arms for going to the bathroom?" Krinks blinked slowly, which when you have six eyes creates quite the ripple effect. "I am Professor Krinks, Director of Advanced Cognitive Sciences, holder of 17 doctoral equivalents, and architect of the most sophisticated intelligence measurement system in known space." "That's a really long name," Zoe said thoughtfully. "Can I call you Professor Q? Also, do you guys have snacks here? I get really hungry when I think hard, and Mom packed me some goldfish crackers, but I ate them on the spaceship thing." Ambassador Cleet made a sound somewhere between a cough and the noise small animals make when they realize they're about to become someone's lunch. "Professor, I should mention that the classification of Earth's species depends entirely on the results of today's evaluation. If the human fails to demonstrate adequate cognitive capability, well, yes. Krinks waved one of his arms dismissively. "Inferior species classification, restricted galactic access, the usual bureaucratic nonsense. Though I must say, Ambassador, looking at your representative here, I'm not entirely optimistic about humanity's prospects." Zoe had wandered over to one of the quantum processors, and was now poking it with her finger. "This is pretty," she announced. "It looks like the lights on my nightlight at home. Does it do anything cool?" "That," Krinks said with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts, "is a Class 7 quantum logic matrix, capable of processing theoretical scenarios across 17 dimensions simultaneously." "Oh," Zoe poked it again. "So it's like a really fancy computer." The professor's eye twitched. Actually, several of his eyes twitched, creating a rather unsettling strobe effect. "Child, that device contains more processing power than your entire planet's combined technological infrastructure." "Cool. Can it play games?" And that, as they say, was when Ambassador Cleet knew with absolute certainty that his diplomatic career was about to become a very short footnote in the annals of interstellar relations. Professor Krinks cleared his throat, which sounded like a garbage disposal trying to process a harmonium. "Very well. Let us begin with the preliminary assessment. These are what we call warm-up exercises, designed to ease subjects into the evaluation process." He gestured grandly with three arms while using the fourth to operate a holographic control panel. The air shimmered, and suddenly the room was filled with floating mathematical equations that looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought regular calculus was for toddlers. "Your first challenge," Krinks announced with the smugness of someone who'd never met a human child, "is a simple quantum probability matrix. You must determine the likelihood of particle decay across 14 dimensions while accounting for temporal flux variations. Most adult specimens require approximately 47 minutes to—" "Oh, that one's easy," Zoe interrupted, squinting at the floating numbers. "It's 0.847 recurring, but you have to account for the wobble in the 7th dimension, so really it's more like 0.849. Can I have a juice box now?" The professor's six eyes performed what can only be described as a synchronized blink. Excuse me." "The answer," Zoe said patiently, like she was explaining something to a particularly slow adult. "It's 0.849-ish. The math is kinda like that puzzle game on my tablet, except with more purple floaty things. She paused thoughtfully. Speaking of purple, do you guys poop purple too, or is that just your skin color? Ambassador Cleet made a strangled noise, and began frantically checking his diplomatic immunity documentation. The answer is correct, Krink stammered, his voice climbing several octaves. But that's impossible. The calculation requires mastery of hyperdimensional mathematics, theoretical physics, and advanced probability theory. If you say so, Zoe shrugged. What's next? Oh, and seriously, I really need to know about the bathroom thing. Like, do you have one bathroom for all 4 arms, or do you need a special bathroom that's bigger? Krinks, clearly rattled but determined to prove this was a fluke, waved his arms again. The quantum equations dissolved, replaced by what looked like a chessboard designed by someone who'd eaten way too many mushrooms and had strong opinions about geometry. Multi-dimensional strategic analysis, he announced, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. This is our standard intermediate level assessment. You must navigate a 17-layer strategic matrix while accounting for temporal paradoxes and quantum uncertainty principles. The current galactic record is held by a Centaurian Grand Master, who completed it in 4 hours and 36 minutes. Zoe tilted her head and studied the board for approximately 3 seconds. Then she started moving pieces with the casual efficiency of someone organizing their sock drawer. Knight to Queen's Bishop 7 across the temporal fold. Quantum Rook takes Paradox Pawn in Dimension 12. And she made a series of moves that looked completely random but somehow caused the entire board to light up in what could only be described as a victory pattern. Checkmate, or whatever you call it when you win the crazy space chess game. The holographic board exploded into celebratory sparkles. Professor Krinks stood there making fish mouth movements, which would have been more impressive if he'd actually been a fish. That took you 37 seconds, he whispered. Yeah, it was fun. Kinda like when I play chess with my dad, except he doesn't have all the floaty parts. Zoe bounced on her toes. What else you got? Oh, and I figured out why you didn't answer my bathroom question. You probably have 4 separate bathrooms, right? 1 for each arm. That's actually really smart, because imagine having to wait in line for yourself. By now a small crowd of alien students had gathered outside the testing chamber, their various faces pressed against the transparent walls like they were watching the galaxy's most confusing sporting event. Ambassador Cleet was now openly sweating, which was impressive considering his species didn't technically have sweat glands. Professor, perhaps we should take a short break too. No, Krinks said firmly, though his voice cracked slightly. No breaks. We continue. Because nothing says healthy academic mindsets quite like a professor whose entire worldview is currently being demolished by someone who still loses teeth naturally and thinks cooties are a legitimate medical concern. Professor Krinks was now producing what could generously be called perspiration, though it looked more like his skin was leaking purple glitter. This was not going according to plan. In fact, this was going so far off plan, that the plan was now a tiny dot somewhere in his rearview mirror, waving goodbye. Right, he said, his voice carrying the kind of forced cheerfulness that usually precedes complete nervous breakdowns. Let's move on to something more substantial. The testing chamber reconfigured itself with a series of impressive mechanical whirs and clicks. When the light show ended, the room had transformed into what looked like a 3-dimensional maze, designed by someone who'd never heard of physics and had serious issues with the concept of linear time. Behold, Krinks announced, gesturing with all 4 arms in a way that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The labyrinth of infinite contemplation. This challenge has stumped our most advanced graduate students. The goal is to navigate through 17 interconnected puzzle chambers, each requiring mastery of a different cognitive discipline. The fastest completion time on record is 14 hours and 23 minutes. Zoe looked up from where she'd been braiding her hair into what appeared to be a small rope. Ooh, is it like a maze? I love mazes. There's this really cool one at Chuck E. Cheese where you have to find all the tokens, and if you get them all, you win a prize that's probably worth like 50 cents but feels super important. This is somewhat more complex than your primitive entertainment venues. Krinks sniffed, though his sniff sounded a bit shaky. Each chamber contains puzzles that would challenge a doctoral-level intellect. Cool, Zoe bounced toward the maze entrance. Can I start now, or do you need to explain more stuff? Also, I've been thinking about your bathroom situation, and I bet you have really good coordination. Like you could brush your teeth, comb your hair, and do 2 other things all at the same time. That's basically like having superpowers. Professor Krinks made a sound like a deflating balloon. Just begin the maze. Zoe skipped into the first chamber, where she was immediately confronted with what looked like a molecular engineering problem, crossed with abstract art and a headache. The holographic display showed complex protein structures that needed to be manipulated across multiple dimensional planes. "Oh, this is like those twisty puzzle toys," she announced cheerfully, and began manipulating the molecular structures with the casual confidence of someone untangling Christmas lights. "You just have to see the pattern. It's kinda like that thing where you cross your eyes and see the hidden picture, except with more sciencey stuff." Within 2 minutes, the chamber's success chime was playing. Ambassador Cleet had given up on maintaining diplomatic composure, and was now openly staring through the observation window with the expression of someone watching their entire career dissolve in real time. By the time Zoe reached the third chamber, a small crowd of alien faculty members had gathered. By the fifth chamber, students were abandoning their own studies to witness what was rapidly becoming the most spectacular academic crisis in Galactic Academy history. "This is impossible," muttered Dr. Vexuler, a renowned expert in cognitive assessment, who had 6 advanced degrees and a reputation for making grown aliens cry during oral examinations. "She's treating graduate-level theoretical challenges like children's games." "That's because they kind of are children's games," Ambassador Cleet said weakly, watching Zoe solve a quantum encryption puzzle while humming what sounded like a commercial jingle. "Humans give these kinds of problems to their offspring for entertainment." The assembled alien academics turned to stare at him with the collective expression of individuals who had just learned that their life's work was essentially the intellectual equivalent of finger painting. Meanwhile, Zoe had reached Chamber 12, and was currently solving what Professor Crinks had once described in a published paper as the most elegant fusion of mathematical theory and practical application ever conceived. She was doing this while simultaneously trying to peek around the corner to see what was in the next room. "This one's pretty," she called out to the observation deck. "It's got all sorts of swirly colors. It reminds me of that screensaver thing on Dad's computer at work." "Oh hey, Professor Q, do you guys have pets? Like, do you have space dogs or space cats? Or do you have completely different animals that are weird and cool?" Professor Crinks was now making a sound like a broken air conditioner. His carefully constructed academic superiority was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami, and an 8-year-old human was doing it while asking about pets. 14 chambers completed," announced the testing facility's automated voice. "Current time, 18 minutes, 47 seconds. "What?" Crinks shrieked, which echoed impressively through the chamber and caused several junior faculty members to seriously reconsider their career choices. Professor Crinks stood in the center of his ruined academic pride, breathing heavily through what might have been nostrils, but could just as easily have been decorative holes. His purple skin had shifted to a concerning shade of lavender, and all 4 of his arms were trembling like leaves in a hurricane made entirely of existential dread. "No," he whispered. Then louder, "No, this is not happening. This cannot be happening." The maze's completion fanfare was still playing its cheerful victory tune, while Zoe skipped out of the final chamber, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just intellectually demolished what was supposed to be the crown jewel of galactic cognitive assessment. "That was fun," she announced, clapping her hands together. "The last room had this really cool puzzle where you had to make the colors match while solving math problems, and thinking about space stuff all at the same time. It was like playing 3 games at once. Oh, and I figured out something about your species while I was in there." "What?" Crinks croaked, though at this point he seemed to be running on academic fumes and sheer stubborn denial. "You definitely have 4 separate bathrooms," Zoe said with the confidence of someone who'd solved the universe's greatest mystery. "Because I was thinking about how you'd coordinate everything, and it would be super inefficient to have all 4 arms share one bathroom. Plus you could have themed bathrooms. Like, one could be ocean themed, one could be space themed, one could be purple themed, which would match your skin, and one could be surprise themed where you never know what color it's going to be." The assembled crowd of alien academics had grown to roughly 30 individuals, representing 12 different species, all of whom were staring at this small human child, with the collective expression of people watching their fundamental understanding of intelligence get fed through a wood chipper. Dr. Krenthax, whose species prided itself on having the most advanced mathematical reasoning in the known galaxy, leaned over to his colleague. "Did she just solve the paradox of infinite recursion while planning bathroom decorations?" "I think she did," whispered Professor Yithgal, whose dissertation on multidimensional problem solving had been considered groundbreaking until approximately 20 minutes ago. "I think she actually did." But Professor Crinks wasn't done. "Oh no. 27 years of academic superiority doesn't die quietly. It goes down swinging like a deranged mathematical octopus. Emergency protocols," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the facility's communication system. "Activate the impossible vault. Authorization code Omega Crinks 77 Desperation." A hush fell over the observation deck. The impossible vault was legendary, whispered about in academic circles, like some kind of intellectual boogeyman. These were the challenges that had broken minds, the puzzles so complex that they'd driven researchers to switch careers and become poets or mushroom farmers. The testing chamber began its most dramatic transformation yet. Walls folded in on themselves, revealing crystalline structures that seemed to bend light and reason in equal measure. The air itself began to shimmer with equations so advanced they existed in 17 dimensions, and required 3 different types of mathematics that hadn't been invented yet. "Behold," Krinks announced, his voice carrying the kind of desperate grandeur usually reserved for the final acts of very dramatic operas, the trinity of impossible contemplation. "These 3 challenges represent the absolute pinnacle of cognitive achievement. They are the theoretical constructs that I spent decades developing, problems so complex that they exist at the very edge of what consciousness can comprehend." The first challenge materialized, a swirling vortex of pure mathematical abstraction that looked like someone had fed calculus to a kaleidoscope, and then asked it to explain the meaning of existence. "The infinite equation," Krinks breathed. "A mathematical proof that demonstrates the relationship between consciousness and reality itself. It requires understanding concepts that exist beyond traditional logic, incorporating elements of philosophy, quantum mechanics, and metaphysical theory. The greatest minds in 43 star systems have attempted this challenge. None have succeeded." Zoe tilted her head and studied the swirling mathematical maelstrom. "Oh wow, this one's really pretty. It's like a screensaver, but with numbers instead of bouncing balls." She paused, squinting at the display. "Wait, is this like one of those magic eye pictures? You know where you have to look at it funny to see the hidden thing?" "It is not a magic eye picture," Krinks said through gritted teeth, though his species didn't technically have teeth. "It is the most sophisticated mathematical construct ever devised." "Okay, but like if I look at it sideways." Zoe tilted her head at an angle that would have given chiropractors nightmares. Oh, I see it now. It's not really about the math at all, is it? It's about how the math makes you feel, and how feeling things changes the math, and how that creates this big loop thing that keeps going around and around until you realize that the answer isn't a number. It's more like like a hug for your brain." She reached out and touched one of the floating equations. The entire construct suddenly collapsed into a single elegant symbol that pulsed with soft golden light. The challenge completion chime played a note so pure and beautiful that several alien faculty members began crying. "Impossible," Krinks whispered. "Completely impossible. What's next?" Zoe asked cheerfully, apparently unaware that she'd just solved a problem that had been considered unsolvable by definition. "Also, I just thought of something else about your bathrooms. Do you have to brush 4 sets of teeth, or do you have one big mouth with all the teeth in it? Because if you have 4 mouths that would be super convenient for eating, but it might make talking confusing." The second challenge activated automatically, a 3-dimensional puzzle that seemed to exist in several different states of reality simultaneously. It was called the Quantum Labyrinth of Temporal Paradoxes, and it had been designed to test whether consciousness could maintain coherence while experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. Zoe looked at it for about 15 seconds, during which she also managed to retie her shoelace and count the number of purple spots on Professor Krinks's head, 47, in case anyone was wondering. "Oh, this is like that movie where the guy keeps living the same day over and over again, except it's a puzzle instead of Bill Murray," she said, and then proceeded to solve it by somehow thinking about it in 4 dimensions, while simultaneously not thinking about it at all. The third and final challenge was the paradox of ultimate understanding, a philosophical and mathematical construct designed to test whether intelligence could comprehend the nature of its own existence, while simultaneously questioning the validity of that comprehension. Zoe solved it by asking, "Why are you trying so hard to prove you're smart instead of just being smart?" which caused the entire construct to dissolve into what could only be described as the mathematical equivalent of a gentle laugh. Professor Krinks stood there, surrounded by the smoking remains of his life's work, making a sound like a deflating balloon that had somehow learned to experience existential crisis. "Emergency faculty meeting," he whispered. Code red. Code red. "Someone get the chancellor. Someone get the board of regents. Someone get my therapist." The emergency faculty meeting was in full swing, which is to say that 43 of the galaxy's most distinguished academics were currently engaged in what could generously be called dignified panic, but looked more like a support group for people whose entire worldview had just been demolished by someone who still believed in the Tooth Fairy. Professor Krinks sat at the head of the conference table, staring blankly at the holographic display that showed Zoe's test results. Every metric was off the charts. Not just off the charts, but so far beyond the charts that the charts had filed a formal complaint and requested hazard pay. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Millithan, whose species was renowned for their logical approach to crisis management, there was a malfunction in the testing apparatus. Equipment failure would explain the anomalous results. I ran 17 diagnostic cycles, Crinks said in the voice of someone whose soul had been gently removed with a spoon. The equipment is functioning perfectly. She solved problems that were designed to be unsolvable. She treated my life's work like, he paused, searching for an appropriately devastating comparison, like a children's activity book. Meanwhile, in the facility's cafeteria, Zoe was having the time of her life discovering that alien food came in colors that didn't exist on Earth, and that some of it actually sparkled when you poked it with a fork. This blue stuff tastes like cotton candy mixed with lightning, she announced to Ambassador Cleet, who was sitting across from her looking like he'd aged several years in the past few hours. Do you think Professor Ku is okay? He looked kinda stressed. Maybe he needs a vacation. My mom always says that when Dad gets all worked up about spreadsheets, he needs a vacation. I think Professor Crinks is having what we might call a professional crisis, Cleet said carefully. You see, Zoe, those puzzles you solved, they were supposed to be impossible. Zoe considered this while chasing a piece of sparkly purple food around her plate. Well, they weren't really impossible, they were just kinda tricky. Like those puzzle games on my tablet, except with more floating parts and better graphics. Ambassador Cleet nearly choked on his beverage, which tasted like liquid mathematics and was probably not meant for human consumption anyway. Puzzle games on your tablet. Yeah, I've got like a million of them. There's this one called Brain Teasers Extreme, where you have to solve math problems while building structures and thinking about patterns all at the same time. It's super fun. And there's another one called Quantum Quest where you have to navigate through these crazy mazes while solving riddles about space and time and stuff. She paused to take another bite of the sparkly food. Oh, and Mystery Math Adventure, where you have to figure out secret codes and solve puzzles to save the universe from boring problems. Cleet's expression was slowly transitioning from diplomatic concern to something approaching existential horror. Zoe, when you say you have a million of these games, well, maybe not a million, but lots. My tablet has like 3 screens full of puzzle games. Mom says they're educational, but really they're just fun. Sometimes I play them when I'm supposed to be sleeping, but don't tell her I said that. She grinned conspiratorially. The best ones are the really hard ones that make you think about stuff in different ways. Like there's this one where you have to solve problems by thinking about what would happen if math worked backwards, and another one where you have to build bridges using only geometry and good vibes. Ambassador Cleet stood up so quickly that he knocked over his chair. Excuse me for just one moment, he said, and practically sprinted toward the conference room. He burst through the doors just as Professor Crinks was explaining to the assembled faculty how this event represented a fundamental crisis in their understanding of intelligence across the galaxy. Emergency information, Cleet gasped, still out of breath from his sprint. The human child just informed me that the challenges she completed are essentially identical to recreational activities that her species provides to their offspring for entertainment purposes. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when entire civilizations realize they've made terrible mistakes. Entertainment, repeated Dr. Vexular slowly, as if the word might make more sense if pronounced with the proper reverence. She specifically mentioned possessing what she called a million puzzle games on a personal computing device. Cleet continued, his diplomatic training finally cracking under the strain. Games with names like Brain Teasers Extreme and Quantum Quest that apparently involve solving mathematical paradoxes and navigating dimensional mazes for fun. Professor Millithan raised one of her appendages. Ambassador, are you telling us that what we consider the pinnacle of intellectual achievement, humans give to their children as recreational activities? That appears to be the case. Yes. The sound that emerged from the assembled faculty was difficult to describe. It was part collective gasp, part existential whimper, and part the noise that civilizations make when they realize they've been dramatically overestimating their own intelligence for several thousand years. Professor Crinks made a sound like a computer trying to process a paradox. But the complexity, the mathematical sophistication, the philosophical implications. She said they were kinda tricky, and compared them to tablet games. Cleet said gently, which was about as gentle as you can be when delivering news that essentially amounted to your entire academic field as human children's entertainment. Dr. Krenthax, who had spent 40 years studying advanced mathematical reasoning, slowly lowered his head to the conference table. My dissertation, he mumbled. My life's work on hyperdimensional problem solving. It's a children's game. Not just children's games. Cleet corrected, consulting his notes. Educational children's games. Apparently, human parents use these types of challenges to help their offspring develop cognitive abilities during their leisure time. The implications hit the room like a wave of intellectual devastation. If humans were casually giving problems of this complexity to their children for fun, what did that say about human adult capabilities? What did that say about the relative intelligence of every other species in the galaxy? Professor Krinks looked up from his existential crisis with the expression of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about the universe was wrong. Ambassador, he said very quietly, exactly how intelligent are adult humans? Cleet opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Then he opened it again, made a small squeaking sound, and sat down heavily in the nearest chair. He said finally, "I'm not qualified to answer that question. But I'm beginning to suspect that we may have seriously underestimated the species we were supposed to be evaluating." Back in the cafeteria, Zoe had finished her sparkly alien lunch, and was now entertaining herself by folding her napkin into increasingly complex geometric shapes while humming the theme song from a cartoon about a sponge who lived underwater and worked at a restaurant. She had no idea that she'd just accidentally triggered the biggest academic crisis in galactic history, but if someone had told her, she probably would have asked if they had any juice boxes to go with their existential dread. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Classification Bureau looked like it had been hit by a bureaucratic hurricane made entirely of filing cabinets and existential dread. Forms were scattered everywhere, alien clerks were running between departments with armloads of documentation, and somewhere in the background, you could hear the steady sound of staplers working overtime and the occasional nervous breakdown. The human species classification had been upgraded so many times that the paperwork had achieved sentience and was now demanding its own filing system. "Status report," demanded Chancellor Vrexthull, whose usually pristine appearance now resembled someone who had been wrestling with administrative chaos for the better part of a month and losing badly. "Well," said Chief Bureaucrat Entheplix, consulting a holographic display that was scrolling data faster than any reasonable being should be expected to process. "We've reclassified humans from intellectually inferiors to cognitively advanced to highly sophisticateds to potentially dangerous to our current designation of please don't let them know how smart they actually are. And the academic implications. Professor Krinks has requested indefinite leave to study human children's entertainment. He's currently locked in his office with approximately 4,000 human puzzle games and what appears to be a complete mental breakdown. His last communication was a research proposal titled Why Everything I Thought I Knew About Intelligence Was Wrong. A personal journey through academic humiliation." Chancellor Vrexthull rubbed his temples with all 6 of his available appendages. "What about the other faculty? Dr. Milithen has enrolled in something called elementary human mathematics through their planetary education system. Dr. Vrexthull is attempting to solve what humans call sudokus and claims it's revolutionizing his understanding of logical reasoning. And Professor Krentex has submitted a paper proposing that we completely restructure our entire educational system based on human recreational activities. This is a disaster. Oh, it gets worse." Nitheplex continued with the cheerful demeanor of someone whose job involves delivering progressively more devastating news. The Department of Interspecies Relations received a follow-up communication from Earth's educational system. Apparently, they were confused about why we wanted to test their cognitive abilities and offered to send us some of their actual academic prodigies instead of just a random 8-year-old from their equivalent of summer camp. The Chancellor made a sound like a deflating balloon mixed with the gentle weeping of lost hopes and dreams. Random 8-year-old from summer camp. According to their records, the human child Zoe Martinez was selected essentially at random from a list of students who had shown up for their recreational education program that day. She wasn't even one of their academically gifted children. She was just available. The implications of this statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud of shattered academic pride. "Sir," Nitheplex continued, because apparently the universe had decided that today was a day for complete intellectual devastation. "There's more. How could there possibly be more? Earth's educational system also sent us a sample of what they call standardized testing materials for their elementary school students. I had our best analyst review them." He paused dramatically, which was probably unnecessary given that everyone in the room was already experiencing various stages of cognitive crisis. "Sir, their 3rd grade mathematics curriculum includes concepts that we don't introduce until graduate-level studies." Chancellor Vrexthull slowly lowered his head to his desk and began making soft whimpering sounds. Additionally, Nitheplex pressed on with the relentless efficiency of someone whose job was to deliver bad news and who was very good at their job. "We received a cultural exchange package that included samples of human entertainment media. It appears that they have something called video games that make our most advanced training simulations look like recreational activities for mentally impaired individuals. Please stop talking, the Chancellor whispered. And they're teenagers, sir. They're teenagers apparently engage in something called speedrunning, where they solve complex strategic challenges in impossibly short timeframes while broadcasting their activities to millions of other humans for entertainment purposes. The Chancellor raised his head and looked at Mytheplex with the expression of someone who had given up all hope of living in a rational universe. Are you telling me that human adolescents treat our most sophisticated strategic simulations as performance art? That appears to be the case. Yes, sir. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Zoe Martinez was in her bedroom playing a new puzzle game on her tablet while her mother called up the stairs that dinner was ready. Just one more level, Zoe called back, completely absorbed in a challenge that involved managing 17 different resource streams while solving calculus problems and building a virtual city that operated according to principles of advanced physics. Her mother, Dr. Susan Martinez, who held 3 PhD degrees and worked for NASA's Theoretical Propulsion Division, smiled and shook her head. Kids these days, she muttered, then returned to reviewing her notes on hyperdimensional engineering, which she was hoping might help with the space program's latest project to develop faster-than-light travel. She had no idea that her daughter had accidentally caused the greatest academic crisis in galactic history, but if someone had told her, she probably would have been proud that Zoe was keeping up with her educational games while they were traveling. Back at the Galactic Academy, Professor Crinks sat in his office, surrounded by printouts of human puzzle games and what appeared to be several thousand pages of research notes written in increasingly frantic handwriting. Candy Crush, he muttered to himself, staring at his latest discovery with the expression of someone who had found the mathematical equivalent of the Holy Grail. They call it Candy Crush, and it involves pattern recognition, strategic resource management, and probability calculation at a level that exceeds our graduate-level cognitive training programs. He picked up another game description, Tetris, a spatial reasoning challenge that operates in real time and increases in complexity at exponential rates. They give this to their children as a way to pass time. His door chimed, and Ambassador Cleet entered, looking like someone who had spent the last few weeks reconsidering every life choice that had led him to his current position. Professor, Cleet said gently, I have some additional information about human recreational activities that you might find relevant to your research. Crinks looked up with the hollow eyes of someone whose understanding of intelligence had been thoroughly deconstructed and rebuilt several times in the past month. What now? Well, Cleet said, consulting his notes, it appears that humans have something called chess, which is a strategic simulation that children learn for fun, and apparently some of their most advanced practitioners can calculate thousands of possible outcomes simultaneously while operating under severe time constraints. Professor Crinks made a small whimpering sound. Also, Cleet continued, because apparently the universe wasn't done with academic devastation for the day, they have something called crossword puzzles that combine linguistic analysis, pattern recognition, and cultural knowledge in ways that would challenge our most advanced translation algorithms. They publish these daily in their news media for general entertainment. Daily, Crinks repeated faintly. For general entertainment, yes sir. Professor Crinks looked out his window at the galaxy beyond, where countless civilizations continued their existence, blissfully unaware that everything they thought they knew about intelligence had been quietly revolutionized by an 8-year-old girl who just wanted to know about alien bathroom arrangements. Cleet, he said finally, I think we may have made a very small error in our assessment of human cognitive capabilities. How small an error, sir? Professor Crinks gestured at the mountain of research materials surrounding him, then at the holographic displays showing human children's games, then at the communication from Earth's educational system offering to send their actual academic prodigies. Cleet, he said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had stared into the abyss of his own ignorance and found it staring back. I don't think we're qualified to assess human intelligence. I don't think anyone in the galaxy is qualified to assess human intelligence. I think humans have been quietly operating at cognitive levels that we can't even comprehend, and they've been doing it so casually that they give their most complex intellectual challenges to their offspring as recreational activities. He paused, then added with the kind of cosmic exhaustion usually reserved for people who had just realized that everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. I think we need a bigger filing system. Outside, the galaxy continued its stately rotation, completely unaware that it had just been intellectually conquered by someone who still believed that cooties were a legitimate medical concern and that the best way to solve complex problems was to ask inappropriate questions about alien bathroom habits. And somewhere on Earth, Zoe Martinez finished her puzzle game, earned a high score that would have revolutionized 17 different academic fields, and went downstairs to have dinner with her family, where the most pressing intellectual challenge of the evening would be convincing her parents that ice cream was a perfectly reasonable vegetable substitute. The universe, as it turned out, had a sense of humor after all.